Hey guys, welcome to this video on Project Management 101. I am Elton from Edureka, and in this video today, I will teach you everything you need to know about project management. But before we get started, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. And if you haven't already, make sure to click the bell icon to receive our updates. We also have a lot of training programs and certifications on our site. So if you are interested in them, do check out the links given in the description. Now the first thing we need to understand to learn project management is what is projects. After all, that is what we are going to be dealing with, right? And after that, we will see the need of projects and why we need to manage them in the first place. We will also need to see what makes a project successful so that you know when your work is done right. With that, we will be able to start learning what project management is. Now, in project management, we will be learning a lot of theoretical concepts like triple constraint triangle, methodologies used, programs, portfolios, etc. We will also be covering a lot of roles seen in this domain, the different organizational structures, the tools that are used, and the departments that you can see in your organization. And this will help you get started with your career in project management as soon as possible. So the first thing that you will need to see in your journey in project management is what is a project. Number one, project is temporary. A project has a definite start and end date. This is what makes it temporary. And since a project has a definite start and end date, the scope and resources are also defined because you can only do so much of work within the given time. The resources that you allocate and the amount of work that you do must be limited to the amount of time that you are given. Now, projects are also unique. Projects are a one-time, once-off activity that you will never repeat again. Every project that you will ever work on will be unique and it will have very unique output. With this, we can see that the textbook definition of a project is a specific set of activities designed to accomplish a well-defined unique objective. This means that you will do a very specific set of activities within the given amount of time to accomplish a well-defined and unique objective. Now that we have seen the theory of what a project is, let us take a few examples. We can see over here the construction of Mount Rushmore. They built a beautiful, unique, and colossal structure within the given amount of time. The work that they did and the result of that work was delivered within a specific amount of time. This is a project. Now, projects don't just need to be construction work. They can also be something like software, for example, Windows 11, where they developed a specific set of features within the given amount of time to improve upon the existing product. This is also what you can consider a project. Now let us see this with a few examples. Consider making a new version of a phone. Would you consider this a project? Well, this is a project. But what about making thousands of these new phones? This is definitely not a project. This is what we call an operation. An operation is a repetitive task. These are mainly administrative in nature. For example, eating, sleeping, brushing your teeth, etc. for a person is an operation because they do this every day. Now let us take another example. What do you think about designing a new building? Is this a project? Well, if you said yes, then you would be right. Designing a new building is indeed a project. But what about maintaining that new building? Now, maintenance usually involves paying the insurance, cleaning your house, painting it occasionally, etc. These are things that you do it repeatedly and you do it for a long period of time, right? So you can't consider that as a project. Now that we have seen what projects are, let us see the motivation or inspirations for those projects and understand where they come from. Now, these are some of the points that usually inspires for a new project. Consider new technology. If you think about it, just a few years ago, we used to use telephones and that was working fine. But why exactly are we using smartphones these days? It is because of improvements to technology and radical changes to it. Competition can also be considered as a motivation to projects. If you have a product and your competitor is providing a better product than you are, then you are inclined into making a new and better version of a product, right? This is what competition brings, and that can be considered as an inspiration for a product. Customer requests. If your customer wants something, you need to give it, right? Business needs are pretty much the same. You need to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of your business, and that is where you consider your projects. Material issues, market demands, stakeholder requests, social needs. These are all real-world issues, and you need to treat them as such. You need to see the potential for a project. You need to see the motivation and the inspiration for a better product, and you need to make those changes to your product so that you can stay ahead of the market. Now that we have seen what a project is and what exactly inspires a project, we now need to see what defines project success. How exactly do you define project success? What are the steps that you need to take to make a project successful? And how you know that you are on the right track? The first point over here is schedule. You will need to evaluate your progress on the go. If you have a timeline, stick to it. And if there are any slippages in that timeline, you will need to make sure that you have a plan to deal with it. You don't want to stop your entire project because one task got delayed, right? So you will need to make sure that you have plans set in place so that that doesn't happen. The second point is cost. Evaluate and reforecast to compare with the original budget. What this basically means is that you will need to manage your expenses. You will need to see that all your expenses are within the budget and nothing exceeds over it, and you don't need any unnecessary costs. You will need to make sure that you set a proper budget and that everything runs inside that budget. The third point is quality. Review your project frequently and at the end of each and every project phase. You should have well-defined quality standards that are accessible by everyone. What I mean by well-defined over here is that your quality standards should be quantitative. You can't say something like that movie is bad, right? Because you don't know exactly what is bad over there and what can be improved. So you must make sure that your quality standards are quantitative and it is very well defined. And it should also be accessible by everyone. This is because if your quality standards are accessible, your employees can refer to them frequently and make sure that the development is done according to it. This will make the entire process easier. The next point is stakeholder satisfaction. We have an entire section dedicated to this later in this video, and all I want you to know right now is stakeholders are someone who are affected by your project and your product, and they need to be satisfied with what you are developing. Now, the final point over here is the alignment to business case. Arrange project to optimally fulfill its long-term purpose. Now, every project has a business sense. This business sense is documented inside the business case report. What you need to do is make sure that you are developing your project according to that business case report. Cost, schedule, and quality is just one part of the equation. You must also see whether your project is actually getting the benefits. You must also see whether your project is meeting the original requirements that it was supposed to meet. And you must also see whether the problems that led to this project being here still exists. And you should also verify if the project you are working on is still valid for the consumer. This is called the project's alignment to the business case. Now that we have seen what a project is, what motivates a project, and what makes it successful, we can finally get started with project management. Project management is the process of leading the work of a team to achieve all the project goals within the given constraints. What this essentially means is that you, as a project manager, will bring together a bunch of people, assign them resources, and then achieve your project goals within the given constraints. With this, we can see that the textbook definition of project management is the application of knowledge, skills, methods, experience, tools, and techniques on project activities to meet the project objectives. Now that we have seen what project management is, let us discuss on an essential concept, that is the triple constraint triangle. Now assume that you have a triangle and that the area of that triangle represents the quality of your product. The three sides of that triangle would then be the time, the cost, and the scope of your product. Now, as a project manager, your goal should be to get a balance between all these three constraints. That way, you can get the optimal quality for the constraints that were provided to you. Now, consider that in your project that you keep the scope the same, but you reduce the time by half. Now that you connect the cost side of that triangle, you will see that the cost has indeed reduced for that project. But what about the quality? Can you see that the quality of your project has reduced to around half of what it was before? This is what we mean by the triple constraint triangle. All three constraints are interrelated to each other. So a strain on one constraint affects all others. As a project manager, one of the toughest tasks for you would be finding the right balance between all these three constraints. Now that we have seen the triple constraint triangle, let us see a few project management methodologies. The first point over here is cost and budget. On a scale of 1 to 10, what kind of a budget are you dealing with? An essential part of being a project manager is knowing how to track expenses and managing your budget. You should know what kind of a budget you are dealing with and whether it is necessary for you to stay within it. And if there is a reason to, you can always increase it. The second point is the ability to take risks. What kind of an impact does your project have on your company? Is it a small project that you can finish it and then get it done with? Or is it a large project that has a massive impact on your company? This is something that you will need to know and make sure that you have the appropriate plans for it. You will need to make sure that all the risks that are associated with the projects are minimized as much as possible, so that you can have the safety of your company as the first priority. The third point is client and stakeholders. Now, these are the people who are affected by your project, and you need to make sure that they are well informed. You will need to set the expectations in place, and you will need to make sure that you communicate with them as frequently as possible. The next point is team size. What kind of a team are you working with? Is it a small team that can organize themselves and make sure that they deliver the product? Or is it a large team where you need to take the initiative to delegate the tasks to the required people? You need to make sure that you understand this and take the necessary steps to accommodate your team. Now, flexibility is where you assess how flexible your plan is. There are obviously going to be some changes during the execution of your project. What you need to do is make sure that you have enough space in your plan to accommodate those changes so that your entire project is not stopped because of a small change. Now, the last point over here is timeline. And just like the schedule, you will need to make sure that you know what kind of work and quality that you are expecting. Is it important to deliver results as quickly as possible, or can you take some time and make sure that you deliver the best quality product possible? This is something that you as a project manager should know and should analyze, and then you should take the relevant steps so that you can achieve your goal. So now that we have seen those few points, let us go ahead into programs and portfolios. Now, programs and portfolios are essentially a way of aggregating and grouping together projects so that you can manage them easily. There is one essential difference. Programs are a group of related projects that provide certain benefits when managed together. What this essentially means is that you club together all these different projects together that are related, and you call them a program. Like, for example, you are developing a social media website. Then all the projects that are related to this social media website is clubbed together as a program, because then they can be managed easier and they can be accessible too. Now, portfolios, on the other hand, are not just a group of projects, but can also include projects that do not align with any program. What this means is that portfolios are not just a collection of programs, but can also include projects that don't belong to any current program. You can consider this diagram as an example to visualize portfolios. You currently have two different programs and they have project 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that are separated into those two programs. And these programs are completely independent, right? Now, this is clubbed together as a portfolio because then it gets easier to manage. This is essentially what a portfolio is. Now, the next thing that we will be discussing is the roles that are found in project management. Who exactly does what and what are the responsibilities that come with it? Now, the first thing over here is a project manager. A project manager is a person who leads the team to achieve the project's objectives. What he essentially does is manages the team that actually achieves the project objectives. Next one is the functional manager. Now, the functional manager manages oversight for the functional or business unit. Now, in the company, there are some projects that require different teams. You need to collaborate with different teams, right? So in this case, they would all report to the functional manager. So the next one is the operations manager, who is responsible for the efficiency of the business unit. What he basically does is makes the business process efficient. Now you, as the project manager, will need to communicate with the functional manager and the operations manager for the resources that is required. So you will need to make sure that you have smooth communications with them. So we have seen what a project manager is, what a functional manager is, and what an operations manager is. Now there are different organizational designs or organizational structures which decide how much you communicate with each of these individuals. And depending on it, your business processes will change. Let us see how this is done. Now, your organizational structure is mainly a balance between two key variables. The first is the organizational structure types that are available for use. Now, there are many organizational designs or organizational structures that are available, right? You will need to decide on which one is suitable for you. And the second point is how to optimize them for a given structure. So the organizational structure you have chosen must be optimized for your business processes so that it will work for you. And this will tell you how smoothly your business process will run. Now let us see the organizational structure types. The first one is the functional organization. The second one is called the matrix organization. You also have the projectized organization and the composite organization. So let us first see the functional organization. Functional organization is basically a type of business structure that groups together employees based on their skill, specialty, or related roles. What this basically means is that if you follow this structure and you are given a project, you will group together your employees based on their skills. Like the developers will be together, the designers will be together, the marketing team will be together, and the sales team will be together. This is what a functional organization is. You must also remember that in a functional organization, the functional manager has the higher authority, and the project manager will only overlook the operations. So what this means is that if a clash arises between the functional manager and the project manager, the functional manager's opinion has higher value. The second type of organization is the matrix organization. This organization is a way of arranging your business so that you set up reporting relationships as a grid or a matrix rather than a traditional hierarchy. What this means is that if you have a business following the matrix organization structure, you will be reporting to multiple different managers. Now, this will help you bring in innovation and new ideas in your company, but will also reduce the speed by which your project progresses. Now, in matrix organization, you have three different types of structures. The first type is the weak matrix organization. In this kind of organization, the functional manager has higher authority and the project manager only coordinates the work. This is pretty much same as the functional organization. The second one is the balanced organization. This is where the project manager and functional manager has the same level of authority and reporting is done to both. The third type is the strong matrix organization, where the project manager has higher authority and project delivery is considered the most important. Now you have to remember that regardless of which three matrix organizations you try to use, reporting is done to both managers. So the next kind of organization is the projectized organization. And in the projectized organization, the project manager has the highest authority. And like we have seen before, when the project manager has the highest authority, project delivery is considered to be the most important. Now, in projectized organization, teams are dependent on projects and resources are dependent on need. This basically means that if you have a project, teams are decided on what that project requires and resources are dependent on what that project requires. Now, one thing that I need you to remember about projectized organization is that once the project is done, the teams and resources are then reorganized or discarded. This kind of organization is mainly used when your company is exploring a new domain or a short-term project. Your company will allocate whatever is required to that project, and once that project is done, it will shut down all those operations. Now, the last type of organizational structure is the composite organization. This is basically a mix of all other kinds of organizational structures. What you do over here is design the organizational structure while customizing it to your business processes. And since this is a mix of all other kinds of organizations, this is also called a hybrid organization. This kind of organizational structure will allow you to customize it based on your independent needs and make sure that it matches your business processes perfectly. Now, the next thing that we are going to see is the project management office. You might have wondered that if all the employees report to the project managers, who exactly does the project manager report to? Well, the project manager reports to the project management office. The project management office, or PMO, sets and maintains standards for the project management in the organization. And it strives to standardize and improve efficiency during the project execution. Now, what this essentially means is that project management office is a department in the company which sets and regulates the quality that you have for your product. And it maintains a level of quality throughout all the different products that you have and makes sure that the efficiency while doing these projects are improved. Now that we have seen what project management office is, let us see a few benefits that it provides. The first benefit is better transparency. Now, since project management office communicates with the project managers and the employees and sets a standardized quality levels, you can expect better communications and avoid miscommunications. That is essentially what better transparency means. Now, the second point is better project maturity. Since the project management office introduces and standardizes the levels of quality, you can introduce concepts like accountability and democratization while keeping your projects on time and your team on the same page. Now, the third point is C-level alignment. Since the project management office usually communicates with the C-level authorities like CEO, CFO, etc., They are able to help prioritize and direct projects wherever required. The fourth point is accurate and aligned budget. The project management office helps you manage the expenses and make sure that you stay within the budget. Resource allocation and aligned budget can help you satisfy executives and keep the overall project portfolio in check. Now, the last point over here is less failures. Since project management office deals with a lot of projects over time, they will learn a lot of lessons along the way, and they will document it and make sure that that doesn't happen again. So that will in turn reduce failures. Now that we have seen what project management office is and the benefits that you get from a project management office, let us see the types of project management office that is available. The first type is the supportive PMO. The supportive project management office gives you guidelines and guides you and shows you what path could be right. But they have no authoritative power whatsoever. The second type of PMO is the controlling project management office. Now, the controlling project management office has a moderate amount of power over the projects. This is best suited for balanced metrics like organizational structures. The last type of PMO is the Directive Project Management Office. Now, the Directive Project Management Office has a large amount of power and they have a high degree of control over the projects. It is also possible in some cases that the Directive PMO sometimes has full control over the project. This type of project management office can help you maintain a consistent level of quality because there is only a single management authority. Now that we have seen what project management offices are and understood everything about them, now like I told you previously in the video, we will finally be looking at what project stakeholders are. Now, project stakeholders by itself is a very big concept. So in this video, I will only be giving you a brief introduction to it. Now, project stakeholders are the people who are affected by the outcome of your project. What this essentially means is that if you are building a project, then anyone who is affected by the outcome of your project can be considered a stakeholder. Now, like we discussed before in stakeholder satisfaction, project manager's job is to communicate with the stakeholders and make sure that all their expectations are set in place. There are also negative stakeholders, and they are the stakeholders that are affected negatively by the outcome of your project. Now, if you are building a project, then you can't expect everyone to be affected positively by it, right? Negative stakeholders are the ones that are negatively impacted by your project. Now, there are a few things that I want you to remember about project stakeholders. The first thing is that not all stakeholders have the same amount of power and the same amount of impact. Now, you can see over here that we have positive stakeholders and negative stakeholders. If we give them both the same amount of power, then that would cause a problem, right? That is what it means. And you should also remember that not everyone will be satisfied with the project that you built. You as a project manager should understand that not 100% of your stakeholders will be satisfied with your project, and they don't even have to be. People understand that this is a part of the business process and this is how a business runs. Now that we have seen what project stakeholders are, we can finally get started with project management lifecycle. Now, the project management lifecycle essentially has 4 phases. First phase is the initiation phase. In this phase, you will need to identify a business need, problem, or opportunity and brainstorm ways in which your team can meet this need, solve this problem, or seize that opportunity. During this step, you will figure out an objective for your project and determine whether that project is feasible and identify the major deliverables for that project. Once your project is approved and passes this step, you will proceed to the second step, that is planning. During this phase of the project management lifecycle, You break down larger projects into smaller tasks. You will build your team and prepare a schedule for the completion of the assignments. You will create smaller goals within the larger project and make sure that each of them is achievable within the given time frame. The smaller goals should always have a high potential for success. You have now received the business approval, developed a plan, and built your team. Now it's time to get to work. The execution phase turns your plan into action. The project manager's job in this phase of project management lifecycle is to keep the work on track, organize team members, manage timelines, and make sure that the work is being done according to the original plan. The final step in this lifecycle is closure. In the closure phase, you provide the final deliverables, release project resources, and determine the success of the project. Just because the major project of the work is over doesn't mean that the project manager's job is done. There are still important things to do, including evaluate what you did and what did not work in that project. Note that monitoring and controlling is common to each and every phase of this project. This will allow the project manager to make evaluations and be more flexible to ensure that the process is moving ahead in the desired way. Now that we have seen what project management lifecycle is, we can finally get started with project management processes. Now, the project management processes have 5 process groups. They are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing process groups. If you see the table on the right, you can see that the first row in the table has these process groups. Now, the project management processes also deal with 10 different knowledge areas. They are integration, scope, time, cost, quantity, human resource, communications, risk, procurement, and stakeholder. So if you see the table, you can see that the first row of the table contains all these 10 knowledge areas. And these knowledge areas and process groups are formed into a matrix, and the blocks in these matrix refers to the tasks that are associated with those particular rows and columns. If you refer to the PMP courseware, you can see the input, the output, the tools and techniques that are used with each of these tasks. Now, in this video, we will be discussing about the tasks that are associated with each of the process groups briefly. And if you want to refer to them in detail, you can always refer to the PMP courseware. Now, the first process group that we are going to be discussing on is the initiating process group. And if you look at the PGKA table, you can see that in the initiating process group, you have 2 tasks, and that is the developing project charter and identifying stakeholders. Now let us see what you as a project manager will be doing in the initiating process group. The first task will be to perform a project assessment. Over here, you will see the historical data, the lessons learned, and you will conduct a feasibility study to see how this project benefits your company. The next point is identifying key deliverables. What exactly is this project going to provide, and how exactly are you going to benefit from it? You will need to provide quantitative estimates and make sure that everyone knows exactly what this project is going to provide. The third thing is performing stakeholder analysis. Over here, you are going to identify who your stakeholders are, and you are going to communicate them and make them understand why this project is important and how this project is relevant to them. This is done to make sure that you have the relevant support that is needed for your project. Identifying high-level risk is also one of the tasks that you will be doing over here. You will need to see exactly what kind of an impact that the project has on your company, and you will need to assess the risks that are associated with them and make sure that those risks are something that is worth taking. After this, you will compile all this research into the project charter document. This project is provided to the sponsorer who will be providing money for your project. You will conduct a lot of meetings with these sponsorers and make sure that you do the appropriate changes so that the sponsors feel comfortable with your project charter. And once everything is satisfactory, you will finally gain the project charter approval. You will then conduct the benefit analysis. Over here, you will see exactly what benefits your project provides and how exactly you can make the stakeholders happy. You will also need to see how exactly the project aligns with your business case and how exactly your organization benefits from it. And the last thing is to inform stakeholders of the charter approval. Over here, you are going to be informing your stakeholders about the key deliverables of your project, the project milestones, and their roles and responsibilities in accordance to this project. This is done so that everyone has a common understanding of what this project is going to be and that their expectations are set. The next part is the planning process group. Now, before we get started with the process group, you can see the PGKA map and check that there are a lot more tasks or processes within this group, right? This is why we say planning phase is important. The more you plan, the less work you'll have to do afterwards. Now let us see what you'll do as a project manager in this process group. The first thing that we'll need to see is review or assess project requirements. You will have to prepare detailed project reports regarding the requirements and also the constraints that you came up with based on the project charter, history, and lessons learned by the PMO, and also the resources that you currently have. You will need to use requirement gathering techniques on all of these to find out exactly what requirements the project has. You have also done this for the project charter in the initiating process group, and over here you will review those requirements and make appropriate changes. After this, you will need to develop a scope management plan to appropriately set the scope using scope management techniques. Do you remember that we talked about the scope in the triple constraint triangle? This is exactly where you use those concepts to appropriately guide yourself. Now, once you are done with the scope management plan, you will need to come up with the cost management plan. With the cost management plan, you will need to manage your expenses and keep track of your budget with the relevant techniques that are used. These techniques are called estimation techniques and are used depending on the scope, schedule, resources, quality, etc. After this, you will need to develop the schedule. You will break the concepts into subtasks and make sure that these subtasks can be completed within the given amount of time. There are obviously techniques that are used to schedule your business processes, and this is dependent on the scope of your project, the project deliverables, and the resources that are available for you. This can help you with the timely completion of your project while adhering to the constraints that were provided for you. Can you see that we have just spoken about the scope, the cost, and schedule? This is exactly what the triple constraint triangle is about, and this is what makes it important. The next point is the resource management plan. This is where you set the roles and responsibilities of your team members and organize the resources based on your project structure. You can also provide suggestions on how the available resources will be managed throughout your project. The next point is communications management plan, and this is where you set the plan of how the flow of communications work in your project. This is again based on the organizational structure and the stakeholder requirements that were provided for you. Some people are more actively engaged in the development while others just need a gist of what's going on, right? So you will need to develop a communications plan to make sure that everyone is able to collaborate efficiently. The procurement management plan is also an essential concept. This is based on the project goals, the charter, and also the resource availability. You must make sure that everything is available or procured when needed. Then you have the quality management plan. This plan will cover all of the concepts that we have seen in the triple constraint triangle and will help you maintain a level of quality standard. Now that we have discussed this, can you see that we are pretty much covering all the knowledge areas that we have? We have discussed the scope, the cost, the schedule, resources, communications, and also the quality. This just serves to highlight the importance of planning the right way. You will need to define and maintain quality standards and make sure to review them whenever possible. Up next, we have the change management plan, and over here, we will need to see how we can reduce and prepare for the variables during the project. You don't want the progress of the entire project to stop because one variable was not available or because one person left the company, right? The change management plan will help you prepare for these scenarios and make sure that you are not vulnerable to changes in the project. You will also need a plan for risk management, which tells you how you deal with risks. For this, you will need to keep a risk register and identify, plan, organize, and prioritize the risks in your project. There are always some risks associated with any project, and a project manager's job is to make sure that the impact of the risk is minimized if it ever occurs. You should also develop a stakeholder management plan to identify the stakeholders and develop communications with them. You will need to see their requirements for the project and the impact that they will incur from this project. And at last, you will need to compile all these plans and present it to the stakeholders so that everyone is informed about your plans and know how everything is going to be organized. Now, the next process is the execution progress group. Over here, the first thing that you will do is acquire and manage the project resources. This will be based on the resource management plan and the procurement management plan. You will need to see what resources are needed for your project, and you will need to procure them based on those needs. The next step is to manage task execution. This is dependent on your project management plan, and you will need to communicate and get updates about task execution so that you know when you are on the right schedule. Implementing quality management plan is again the same as what we discussed in the planning process group. You will need to frequently check for the quality of your product and make sure that it is following the necessary guidelines. You will need to do this with the tools and techniques that are appropriate or recommended to you, and you will document all those reports. Then you will need to implement the approved changes if necessary and make sure that you fulfill all the requirements. Implementing actions, on the other hand, is a part of risk management plan. You have already made plans for corrective measures for when risks arise. And over here, you will need to implement those corrective measures when needed. Now, after implementing actions, you will need to manage the flow of information. You will need to make sure that everyone is kept informed about their roles and responsibilities, and you will also need to make sure that they know about any changes and updates that have been made. You will obviously need to manage stakeholder relationships. You will need to implement the stakeholder management plan to make sure that you receive continual support from your stakeholders. So up next is the monitoring and controlling process group. If you remember the project management lifecycle that we discussed about, you know that monitoring and controlling is done throughout the project and is one of the most essential responsibilities of a project manager. The first thing that you would do in this process group is measure project performance. So you would use all the project management tools and techniques available to measure out how well your project is performing. You will need to identify and take measures for any slippages that have occurred. You will use the change management plan to do this, and basically again, you will make sure that any changes have been properly addressed. You will also need to verify the conformation to quality standards, and this is where you will use the quality management plan to verify that your project is in accordance with what is expected. Monitor and assess risk. This is something that you will see in your risk management plan, and you will have to monitor and see whether the risk measures should be executed and whether the risk measures that were formed are still valid. This is because a lot of changes occur during the progress of your project, and you will need to make sure that you are updated on those changes. The next point is review and issue log. Now, you will have an issue log during the project development, and as the project manager, you will need to review those issues and take appropriate actions. You will also need to make sure that the log stays updated and that those updates are received by the relevant authorities. You will need to capture, analyze, and manage the lessons learned. And this is done not only at the end of the project, but also throughout the project. This will help you to continuously improve and reduce the chance of failures. And the final point is to manage the procurement activities which are from your procurement management plan. And you will need to make sure that this plan is being followed and that compliances are set in place for your project activities. And this brings us to the last part of the process groups, and that is the closing process group. Now over here, if you see the PGKA mapping table, then you will see that there are very few tasks that have been assigned. So let us see what the project manager does in this part of the process group. The first thing over here is obtaining the acceptance of your project deliverables. This is done by the relevant stakeholders based on what the project had to provide and the deliverables that was promised to them. You will then need to transfer the ownership of your project deliverables to the relevant stakeholders to facilitate the closure of your project. You will need to obtain the financial, legal, and administrative closures, and this can be found with your PMO. And they will provide you with the generally accepted practices so that you can transfer the responsibility of liabilities to the stakeholders. This is where the job of a project manager ends and the work of a support team begins. You will also need to share the final project report, and this is done according to the communications management plan. Over here, you will be documenting the performance, the expenses, and other deliverables to whomsoever it may concern. Up next, you will archive the project documents, and this is done with your PMO. You will need to do this in compliance with the generally accepted practices for statutory requirements and also potential use in future projects. You will also gather the lessons learned with your PMO, and this can be used to reduce issues and errors in the future projects. Finally, you will obtain feedback from the stakeholders. You will use the appropriate tools and techniques for it and evaluate their satisfaction. This is done according to the stakeholder management plan. So these are the tasks that will be done under the closing process groups. And finally, we can start seeing how we can make these tasks and processes more easier and convenient to manage using the right tools. Now, a project management software has the capacity to plan, organize, and manage resource tools and develop resource estimates. A project management tool will also help you create projects, assign them, and track progress. Some of the common softwares that we usually see in the industry is Trello, Slack, OmniPlan, and the Jira software. If you are interested in learning any of these softwares, you can go ahead and check out our YouTube channel, and we have a lot of videos that are related to them. And with that, we have come to the end of our current session. Hopefully, you have found everything that you were looking for to start your journey in project management. So stay tuned for more updates in this subject because we have a lot more planned for you. So until then, happy learning.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!